Good evening, Spaced Out Radio. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the peaks of Pikes Peak and settle down temporarily under the jet-laden skies of Colorado Springs. It is Saturday, May 4th, Sunday, May 5th for those of you on the East Coast and beyond. I am your host, TessaTNT, and this is Spaced Out Radio. Make sure you head to our website at spacedoutradio.com, peruse the Spaced Out Radio store, find yourself some awesome epic gear, and read the encounter online dealing with everything strange, paranormal, and odd. So tonight, I have a treat for all my guys and gals out there. Tonight, we will be talking to and getting to know the Undertaker, Mr. Stanley Swan. Stanley Swan was brought up with his 3 siblings on a dairy farm in the southern tier of New York State. At a very young age, he knew he was destined to be in the funeral business. Stan spent many years in the broadcast business as an on-air personality before answering the call to enter the funeral service. At age 31, he returned to college, obtained his NYS director's license, and with his wife Sandra, an RN, purchased their small funeral home in the southern tier, which they operated for 20 years. While there, Stan also spent many years in corrections with the local sheriff's department. A bout of cancer led Stan and Sandra to sell their firm, but a short time later returned to the calling he felt so strong about. Now, after almost 30 years, or 37 years, Stan has decided to put in print for others to see the challenges facing those in the funeral service, the highs, the lows, the personal sacrifices, and the rewards. Hey, Stanley, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Thank you, Tessa. It's great to be on your program tonight, and I say hello to you from beautiful Finger Lakes of New York State. If any of you ever get down to this part of the country, in the Finger Lakes area where I reside, we'd love to welcome you down here. It's a great place to visit, and it's great to be on your program tonight.
I'm super excited, and I'm very honored for you to be here. I know you're on the East Coast, so it is very late for you. But as you're saying earlier, being in the funeral business for so many years, you're kind of used to the late hours?
Yeah. The funeral business, as are people in the first responder business, whether it's fire departments or ambulance calls, people in the funeral business, no matter where they live around the world, are on that first call basis. And when you have a death call, you usually respond to it immediately, depending upon the situation, and that can be almost any time of the day or the night if you happen to be on call that day or night. So, yeah, night hours are it's part of the business that you accept when you get into funeral service.
So in your bio, it says that you were interested in being in the funeral business at an early age. What caught your attention in this field?
I actually think maybe I was born into it to some degree. My grandmother's brother was an undertaker in the town that I was brought up in, and he was in the funeral business in the early 1900s, and my parents or grandparents were not involved with it, but my great uncle, as I said, was, and then my brother and I kind of hung out near a funeral director locally where we lived a few miles down the road, and I guess maybe I decided maybe I was like born to be in it. I've always said that most people are born into a profession, and I think everyone's born to do a certain thing. And as you go through life, if the thing that you are doing doesn't give you satisfaction, that you maybe need to listen to the call that's coming your way to maybe go in the direction that you should be going. I was always interested in the funeral business as a kid. So at age 31, I went back to college and got my degree in funeral service and went to work.
And it definitely is a field that a lot of people are bound to run into during times in their life. It's a much needed thing, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, Tessa, it's a very humbling career, and it's a very rewarding career as well. Being able to help people out in very difficult times in their life when they lose a loved one, either under natural circumstances or tragic circumstances. It's a great amount of satisfaction for a person in funeral service when you can help people out. And I'm still in contact with families that I served 25, 30 years ago. I still talk to a lot of those families that I served years ago. So it's a very personal relationship between a funeral director and a family, and a lot of satisfaction. And I think people who get into it really, really enjoy the business because of the satisfaction they receive from helping people out.
Yeah, and you're there for them during a very hard time in their life, and I'm sure, the services you provide and, a lot of people tend to treat people as numbers, but I'm sure you as a funeral director and undertaker, you seem like you have like a softer touch with it and you actually care and try to help people through this process.
Yeah, because every death situation is different. So you have to go into that job as it comes up and treat every family in different respects with different levels of care and nurture and follow-up after the funeral and aftercare, as we call it. And so it's an interesting business. It's very time-consuming. It's probably not for everyone. There's a lot of hours in the job, days, nights, holidays, weekends, and if you should happen to eventually own your own funeral home or mortuary service, you kind of take a hit on the family side because you tend to work a lot of hours.
Did you have kids, or was it just you and your wife? What was your family situation?
Just my wife and myself, and she had two sons, and my wife was an RN when we had our small funeral home, so lots of times she would help me in the funeral home when I needed assistance for this or that, and it was a family business in a small town, and it was in a town that was the size of maybe 10 or 1,100 people, and we knew 90% of the people in our town when we were there. So when someone died, there was a good chance you probably knew the family or may have known that person personally. So it was a very personal business in a small town as opposed to someone in the funeral service who might be in a very large city who probably does not know a lot of the people they serve. But the small town, it's a very personal business.
Were your kids or your wife's kids, were they understanding of the situation? I know your wife and yourself, you work together, which is very awesome that you were able to work as a team to help take care of your small community. Were your kids understanding of the situation?
Yeah. They people who are in the funeral service. It's a family deal. It's hard to do it alone. You need your family help if you're going to be there. And they were always, her sons were very supportive of that. And it was an enjoyable time. We had a lot of good experiences with our families. And living in a small town is a great thing. I've lived in a couple of cities, but living in a small town was a lot more satisfaction as far as serving people.
Yeah, and I can understand and relate to that, being that, a small community is a tight-knit community. Everybody knows everybody. So it's kind of like an extension of your family. We have a question here from Bougie in the chat room, and he was asking about 21 grams. I guess there's a theory out there when a person passes away, they lose 21 grams of their body weight, which is supposedly the weight of the soul. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Boy, I I haven't been asked that question before. You know, the body goes through certain changes upon death, and one is the cooling of the body, and one is the actual what they call the blood draining to dependent parts of the body. It's called gravity, called livor mortis. Blood pools to the dependent parts of the body because of the gravity. And then you have a stiffening of the body called rigor mortis, which sets into the body within 3 to 4 hours after death. But I've never had a question, or I've never been read anything about the actual weight of the body being different upon death. The body is 90% water plus. So over hours, and especially during the embalming process, if people choose that, the weight of the body is going to tendency to change a little bit from time to time. But as far as the actual weight of the soul leaving the body, I've never read anything about that at all. Right. Yeah, it would be. I know there have been other people who've written papers and theses about, what happens to the body at the time of death, and when the spirit leaves the body. I was actually, my sister and I were with my mother physically when she passed away about 20 years ago, and we could actually sense her spirit. We couldn't see the spirit leave the body, but we had that sense, tremendous peace when she passed, and you could almost feel that, she had gone on. And I know other people have tried to photograph people at the time of death with still cameras or video cameras to try to capture that. I've never seen any evidence of that. But if you believe in life after death, as I do and most people do, I think when you do pass, your spirit does physically leave your body. And I could actually feel that change when our mother passed away. It was quite a very humbling experience to be there when she passed.
Yeah, I've been able to be there for a few people in my life when they passed, and you, like you said, you can feel that change. And to me, it was an honor to be there for them during that time in their life, and I think I took it quite well, and it actually gave me a different perspective on death. And it is, basically a part of life. But what an honor to be able to be there for someone during their last breaths and their last moments here on Earth. Everett in the chat. Oh, go ahead.
It is an honor to be there to see someone's life end. It's a difficult thing to be involved with, but it does give you a great sense of the overall where we are in the universe. I mean, how it kind of makes you very small to some degree, because you think about the overall picture, and life and death is within a matter of a few heartbeats, and it can be fleeting. Life can leave us very quickly. And I think you need to be aware of that every day when you're out and about, going about through your daily activities, that, you might not be here within an hour or two. Things happen very quickly out in the world every day, and life can be gone very quickly. So it's just it makes one pause for thought for sure.
Yeah, and I firmly believe in that. And one of my pet peeves is when I leave the house, I'm always sure to hug and kiss my kids because you never know if that's the last time you're going to see them. Because, like you said, anything could happen at any time, and you really don't have a promise as to how long you're going to be here. Your time could be up at any moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Continue on with your thought because I was just going to go to the next question. But if you can.
Yeah, as far as the going about your daily routine, I was involved with the recovery operations when the Twin Towers fell in New York City in 2001, and I was there with our sheriff's department and in a forensic team. I was involved with as funeral director, helping to recover remains and evidence and airplane parts from the Twin Towers, and those people who went into those towers that day on September the 11th, had no idea that was going to be their last morning going to work. I'm sure, and then all of a sudden you have a huge catastrophe, disaster like that, and you have 2,000 people who lost their lives very quickly within a matter of hours, and it was a very humbling experience to go down there and be involved with recovery operations in New York City. It was. I think about that often, and that's one of the chapters in the book Undertakings talks about the recovery we did following 9/11. It was a humbling a week or two that we spent there.
Yeah, I was about to say I could imagine, but I really can't imagine being there at 9/11 and helping to collect remains and try to find everyone. But like you said, what a humbling experience. And you'd think if they did know, like if I knew something was going to happen, I'd probably stay home from work that day.
Exactly right. Yeah, you'd be calling in sick if you had an inkling of anything being wrong that day or any other day that you would go to work.
So, Everett in the chat room was asking, how did having this calling affect your views and fears of death as a child?
Oh, that's a good question. We were semi-religious when we were brought up. We went to church regularly on weekends, and we were in a pretty strict household with parents, and we dealt with kind of life and death living on a farm because we had animals, and I remember when we were kids, my sister, Mary Jane, my younger sister, we used to ride our bikes down the dirt road where we lived on, and when we would find and this is in the book as well, when we would find a sparrow that had been hit by a car or something, we would have a little funeral for the sparrow and have a burial, and that's not unusual because I think a lot of kids do those things, and I don't think you're cut out to be an undertaker just because you did that as a kid. But so when you live out on the farm and you're dealing with animals, you think more about life and death, and maybe a little bit more about your own life and death. But I'm going to be 70 here in a few months, and not knowing how many more years I'm going to be on the planet, I've contemplated not being here. But you don't worry about it because I know there's something beyond here. And if you've done your best while you're here, you don't really worry about your own demise. I think you just kind of think about moving on into the next realm.
So, going back to you as a child, did you have any paranormal experiences, anything like that opened your eyes to there being another side?
As far as no, I never had a near-death experience myself. I had a fellow classmate when I was a senior in high school, just 6 months before graduation. A fellow classmate. There was a small class I was in of 28 or 29 people. I had that fellow classmate was in an auto accident, and was killed just maybe a half a mile from my house where I lived. And I thought about that a lot, but at that time, I kind of knew I would be in the funeral business because the day of our graduation, 6 months later in June, this would have been in June of 1967, our classmates drove down to the cemetery the weekend of our graduation, and I was designated and offered to say prayers at the cemetery. So I guess maybe that was an inkling that, I was going to be involved in the funeral business. And 15 or 20 years later, I'd be going to mortuary school. So and that's kind of odd and to some degree, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like your calling found you before you found your calling. So that's pretty interesting when stuff like that happens. And sometimes, things are meant to be. And for you, it seems like being an undertaker and working with the dead and helping people through this time in life found many different routes to pulling you into this field, basically.
Yep. As I say, the first 12 years of my work, I was in broadcasting, and I loved it. I worked at a number of radio stations around New York State and a couple of large radio stations in Buffalo and Rochester, and I loved being on the air. Played music and was entertaining, and I enjoyed it. But I kind of knew that really wasn't where I was going to be spending the rest of my life. And then it's like the tap on the shoulder comes and says, maybe you're supposed to be doing something else. So you don't fight the call. If you feel the call to do something, whether it's a school teacher or a minister or whatever, you shouldn't fight the call. Go with your gut feelings. Go with what you feel you should be doing, because chances are, I've always said that everybody's born to do a certain thing, and you'll know you're in the right groove when you get there.
Nikki in the chat room was wondering, how do you deal with emotions which may come up when you work with a deceased person?
With my own emotions or family?
I believe she's talking about your emotions.
Okay. It's sometimes very difficult. There have been a lot of funerals that I have wept at, and openly admit that. You cannot, if you're human at all, you cannot totally detach yourself from a given situation. And when you're in the funeral business, you have a lot of difficult death calls that you have to deal with. You have a lot of accidental death. You have a lot of children death. You have homicide. You have suicide. You have accidents of all types. And each one of those situations will draw upon your emotions as a funeral service worker. And you have some pretty difficult weeks. I've had a lot of difficult weeks through my life in funeral service. But you deal with it, and you have to have a few hobbies, and you have to kind of walk away from it from time to time. And it's not always gloom, though. You have to have a good sense of humor to be in the funeral business. And I have a lot of people over the years. You come in to make funeral arrangements, and you get to know people, and people will joke with you, and you have to have a lighter side, because if you didn't have a lighter side, you'd either end up being an alcoholic, or you'd probably be in a mental ward, because there's a lot of very difficult situations you have to deal with. So you just have to deal with each one directly.
As far as 9/11, Nikki also was saying, oh my gosh, how do you deal with mass casualties such as 9/11?
Yeah, the mass casualty team that I was involved with was a national disaster mortuary teams here in the U.S. Under Homeland Security, and they go to an area where there's a big situation of mass death, and actually do the retrieval of the remains, identification, etc. And the 9/11 was a difficult one because of so many partial remains. 4 years after that, I was at Gulfport, Mississippi in 2015 for retrieval of Hurricane Katrina victims. There were about 1,800 people in the Gulf Coast that lost their lives during Katrina. That was a totally different kind of a scenario because of the weather there and the heat that was involved during that situation. It's a big job when you have mass casualties because there's a lot of forensics involved and a lot of people. You have a lot of different people from a lot of different professions who are involved. The funeral business, you have pathologists there, and dental people and X-ray people, and you have a lot of people in a lot of different jobs who are there working as a team to take care of those remains, identify them, get the paperwork done, and hopefully get those remains back to families as quickly as possible. The ultimate goal is to get people identified and to get them back to their home.
Time is an illusion, which is not his real name, obviously, but that's his name in the chat room. He said, I sort of tripped out when they closed the coffin on my grandma. He said he wasn't ready. Do you find yourself giving kids or the younger generation advice when it comes to death? Because sometimes their family is busy dealing with their own pain and don't really understand how to help these kids through it. Do you find yourself helping the younger generation and kids through this process?
Yes. I tell people when they have, especially with young people, it's difficult for kids to go to a funeral home to see a person deceased laying in a casket and to say goodbye. And everybody deals with those emotions differently. And I always tell parents of children, I don't advise them to force their kids to go to a funeral home to see a deceased person. If they wish to, that's great. I've always said don't force them to come. It's nice to have younger people involved. A good way is maybe have them write a last note or two to put a keepsake in with the person before they make burial, to tuck a note in with grandma or grandpa, leave some of their favorite things with them, make it a good experience for the younger person. If they have a bad experience with death early in life, they're going to carry that for a long time. I had, over the years, with families passing away, members of their family passing away, they might have had kids that were in their 40s or 50s who didn't want to come into the funeral home to see their parents because they were never taken into a funeral home when they were younger. I would say a good age, not before age 5. Age 5 and under, they really don't understand the concept of death. I think 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, as you get a little older, you can sit down and talk about the death of the human body and the spirit going to heaven, and they can understand that a little better. But I always tell people, don't force your kids to be involved with that. Let them make their own decision and work with that.
Yeah, and like you said, it's important, not to traumatize them with such things when they're young because it really does carry over and cause other issues as they get older. I found myself having some guilt growing up, because when my mom passed away at her funeral, me and my little brother were running around and just laughing and playing, which is perfectly normal for a little kid because we didn't understand what was going on. And I remember getting looks from people, and they probably thought it odd because why am I not sad right now? So I did feel guilty about that for a little bit, but then I understood, hey, I was a kid. That's how I was supposed to be acting, and quit feeling guilty about things you can't really control.
That's right. That's right. And you should never feel guilty about that. That's what kids do. I've had kids come to the funeral home. They bring their crayons and their coloring books and their tell their stories and some of their toys. And the kids will be kids, and it's hard for them to be involved with death at a young age. And I say, as they get near that age, 8, 9, 10 and up, then they can start understanding the concept of death. But at a younger age, kids will be kids. So you just have to let them do that.
And also, as I was growing up, well, I was 5, almost 6 when my mom passed, and I would look up and talk to her in the sky, and I always knew that there was life after death. I did have a lot of paranormal experiences as a kid, so that may be part of it. What was your first inkling that there is life after death, something more than just, being in a hole in the ground and being eaten up by time and pests?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it goes back to how you're brought up, as a younger person. And as I say, we were brought up in the Catholic faith. We went to church regularly, and we always believed that there was something just beyond being here. And then after you're gone, you're in the ground, and there's nothing else. Well, so there really has to be something else. And although you look back and hear the stories about people who say, well, no one's ever come back to say that there is something else out there, but other people say, yes, people do come back. I've never seen an apparition or a ghostly figure, but I know I've talked to people who have, and they believe in that, and I think those things do exist. I think a lot of it is how you're brought up and what your religious values are, as you're being brought up as a youngster.
And it's funny because it kind of depends on what religion. Because like back in Arkansas in the Bible Belt, I have an aunt back there. I do paranormal investigation before I even started doing this show, and I was proud of the fact that I was out there helping people with certain issues and understanding the other side and trying to coexist peacefully with having entities or spirits in their house. And she really surprised me when she told me that, or asked me why I pray for protection when what I was doing was wrong, because there are not ghosts, there's only demons. So there are different perspectives when it comes to religion. But I was really taken aback when I heard that from her, and I was like, wow, I was really surprised because I thought she was going to go the other direction with it and kind of be proud of me for it. But yeah, it's funny how, like you said, your upbringing and such can really put a light or a damper on what your beliefs are as far as the afterlife.
Yeah, I've run into a lot of people over the years who feel that there is nothing else. I mean, this is the planet you're born on, and there is nothing else out there. When you're dead, and that's it. And that's kind of goes against what a lot of other, I think the majority of people feel that there is something else there after you pass away, And I've always believed that, still believe it, and we're living in different times now where really everything, all the norms are kind of being challenged, Back in the 30, 40 years ago, things were a little bit more stable as far as beliefs in life after death and discipline in the home and all those things. People were set in their ways, but now that we're living in times that people are challenging a lot of things, including their own faith in many degrees. And it's a job for people who are in the clergy to address that too, because they receive the same questions that we do all the time. They're constantly being queried about life after death. What's it all about? Why are we here? What's the purpose of being here? So it's an ongoing discussion, and will continue to be ongoing, I think, Tessa.
Yeah, it's one of those things that have been discussed since the beginning of time. What is the point of being on this earth? What is my purpose here? And as well as, the weather and kids these days. Those are ongoing discussions from the beginning of time. And that is a big question. And to be able to find your gift and work with it and be able to help your fellow human being is quite an honor to be able to be there and do that, because there are a lot of people that don't ever realize what their purpose of being here is. And so it's a big question, but I'm glad you found yours and that you're doing what you're doing and that you're helping your fellow man.
Did you've been doing what you've been doing for a long time? Did you know that you'd be doing your current situation, or was it accidental that you became what you became, or did you kind of know when you were younger you'd be doing this today?
Well, from a very young age, I always knew that there were spirits and such out there, being that from even before my first memory, there's stories of me with certain entities, and my first memory being at the age of 3 and on with spirits and ghosts and whatnot. I had a knowing and a knowledge of it. I found myself to sometimes be afraid, sometimes not. I didn't ever see that I would be doing this. My family was pretty open about the afterlife and ghosts and whatnot, because it was pretty normal for us. Then after my mom passed and we moved and I would make friends, I'd go ahead and tell them stories of things I had experienced, and people would kind of be off-put by it and not want to talk to me because to them it was strange. So I kind of, for a long time, ended up keeping that to myself. And then it was in 2012. And before then, there's certain people that you do grow to trust and know, and you're able to share your stories. But for the most part, you do keep it to yourself so you don't get that judgment or ridicule. But in 2012, a mother that I knew had lost her son, and it kind of brought me out of what I like to call the paranormal closet. And I was like, I don't care anymore. I want to help this person. And so that's what started Four Corners Paranormal Investigations. And we continue to help people to this day. And we don't charge because unlike undertaking and stuff, there's not a lot of help out there. So we don't charge. People can donate if they want to, but we just do it to help our fellow man because, like I said, there's not a lot of help out there, and we don't want to take advantage. But I'm so grateful that I do have the gifts that I do, and I am able to help my fellow man through these ordeals.
Yep. It is a humbling experience to be involved with that, for sure. For sure it is.
So being an undertaker, I have to ask you, have you had any creepy experiences while working on someone, or being in a morgue and alone at night or whatnot? Have you heard things, seen things?
It's uncanny. I knew you were going to ask that as the very next question. That's a little spooky right there.
Right?
I've had not a lot of unusual things happen, but a few. There's one story in Undertakings about a gal who came in to the funeral home one day. This was not at my funeral home, but after I had sold my funeral home, I was working with another larger funeral home in Corning, New York. That was about 30 miles away from where we lived at the time. And I was working at that firm, and one day a lady walked into my office with an urn that she put down on the desk in front of me. was wrapped in paper with some string around it. She told me that this was her mother's cremains. Her ashes were there. She'd had them for like 15 years sitting on the shelf, and she told me that one day while she was just sitting in her living room with her mother's urn upon the shelf, she heard this like screeching, like fingernails being drawn over a chalkboard. And she says it was very unnerving. And she went over and picked up the urn and noticed that there was a crack in the glass. It was a glass urn, and there was actually some little amount of ash that was seeping out of the crack in the glass. And I had a talk with her about it, and she said there was nobody near the urn at the time it happened, and there was no electronics in the room that could have caused it. And so when she brought it into me and she unwrapped it and showed me the urn, it sat on the desk in front of me. And then I had to go out to take a phone call, and she excused herself to go to the restroom or whatever. We came back to the room, and indeed there was a little bit of ash that continued to come out of the urn. So that was kind of strange. She said her mother was a world traveler, so maybe she just didn't have it out of her system yet. So that was kind of an unusual situation to see that. Not too much else unusual in the funeral home itself. Once in a while, a light on or off that shouldn't be or should have been on or off. Nothing very unusual, nothing very unsettling at all. You hear stories about things that happen in mortuaries, and most of them are just, kind of stories, but the urban legend, as we call it down here in the U.S., things that you hear about that have happened, but probably they weren't true, but they were good stories for late-night tales,
Yeah, when I was at the funeral home taking care of my dad's things, he wasn't there at that funeral home. He had ridden a bus to Denver to get checked out for a liver transplant, ended up having kidney failure because the night before he decided to quit taking his bucket full of medicine he had to take every night. And once your body's dependent on something, you take it away, it's going to go into shock. So he ended up having kidney failure, and they ended up cremating him and such. But I asked the Undertaker there about any experiences he may have had at his funeral home, and like you're saying, this story may not be true, it just may have been a really good story. But according to him, there was a family that had lost a loved one, and somehow the kid was left there overnight and had found his way into the room where a lot of the deceased were taken care of. And as he was sitting there in that room overnight or whatnot, he was talking about a bunch of people just sitting there kind of waiting for their time to go and be buried or whatnot. They finally realized this person didn't have the kid, this person didn't have the kid, and they finally found him back there at the funeral home. And then he reiterated his story about the different spirits that were there, and they weren't overly scary except for the fact that they were ghosts, but they were all just sitting there kind of patiently waiting for their time to be taken and put to rest. So that's kind of, like you said, a story that may not be true, but is a good story to tell.
Yeah, I did, pardon me, I did have one year, it was in the month of October. It was a beautiful evening, and we had calling hours in progress, and family was in the front room with the casket and the person who had passed away, and down the front sidewalk to my funeral home. This is October, which is great because it goes along with the story. This black cat, it was right at dusk. This black cat walks down the front sidewalk to the funeral home, walks up the first 3 steps to the porch, and I open the door, and the cat walks through the door goes past the register stand that we have where people sign in to visit with the family, takes an immediate left, which is where you would need to go into the casket, where the casket was. I'm watching the cat, goes into the funeral home, takes the left, walks down past the family. The family's sitting there watching. The cat goes down past the family, walks around the casket, does a 360, comes back out. I open the door. The cat goes down the steps and back down the sidewalk. Never stopped once. That was kind of strange. That was and the fellow that stood at the door with me, I'd known for years. He said, "Did you know that a cat?" And I said, "I've never saw the beast before in my life. He just from nowhere." And it was a good story for October. It was, just very close to Halloween, and there was a cat walking through the funeral home and out the door. But it was kind of weird. I can remember that.
Yeah, and like you said, that's perfect timing for October and being close to Halloween to have a black cat just come in and make its way through the place. And like you said, not stopping once, just kind of knowing where it's going and then leaving once it did whatever it needed.
Yep.
Nikki was saying in regards to the urn story where there was a crack in the urn and the ashes kind of escaping and the noise and such. She said her mama didn't want to be in the urn any longer, and she said, did this lady ever replace the urn or spread her mama's ashes?
No, after that, after the lady came back to the room and we talked about that, I asked her if she wanted me to replace the urn. She hadn't purchased it at our funeral home. But I said, I've got another urn if you want to look at other urns to put the cremains and the ashes in another urn. She said, no. She says, I'm just going to put the paper back around the urn and we'll kind of pick up what kind of came out of the urn there. And she said, I'm just going to take her back to the house. And she says, I've had her on the shelf for about 15 years, and she says, it's time that I probably either scatter or bury her ashes. So she says, I'm going to do that in the next few months. And so she picked the urn up and left, and I never saw the lady again, but she was, it was a kind of a strange day, to see that happen.
Indeed. Everett was saying many people subscribe to the idea of the creepy or strange image of a funeral services provider. How have the funerary sciences worked to change that image over time?
One of the best things that's happened, at least here in the States, and I'm sure it's the same in Canada and other places. Years ago, back in the 40s, the 50s, even maybe into the 1960s, the funeral business was really a very closed business. The funeral directors were not really public relations people. They kind of worked behind closed doors. They didn't go out and talk to people about what they did. It was kind of a private business. They were very closed-mouthed about what went on in the funeral business. And that's changed 180 degrees in the last 20 years. Funeral business now is very open. Funeral directors want you to ask questions about the funeral business. They want you to know as a consumer what you can do and what you can't do and what you should think about be doing. I think it's been it's become educational in the last 2 or 3 decades, and it's really been good for everyone because the consumers now have a right to know, and they need to know answers about embalming. They need to know about buying product or not buying product, what they should be buying or not buying, and it's become a lot more open business now, which is really good. Because years ago, most people didn't even know a funeral director. And today, most people know one, or 2 or 3. And And that's my big thing when I go out to speak at different groups that I speak at. I say, if you don't know someone in funeral service, go out and meet one. Get to know one before you have a need in your family. It's a lot easier to deal with someone you know at the time of a death than to deal with a stranger. So get to know someone ahead of time. Ask questions ahead of time. That's the way you'll get the best satisfaction of dealing with a death in your family.
And I find that to be very true. It's very important to be educated and to educate yourself on certain things instead of having questions forever and being afraid to ask them. You do really find a lot of comfort in gaining knowledge of certain things. When you know the truth, it's easier to put things to rest, as well as put your family to rest. So,
yeah, and a lot of people.
Go ahead.
A lot of people have a lot of questions about funeral service, and the great thing about the internet now is you can go on and Google or about anything and ask about anything, and you can get an answer. And years ago, that a lot of those things just weren't out there, but the information is out there now, and it's really good because it gives people a lot of satisfaction. It relieves their fears. And it just makes the whole process of going through a death in the family a lot easier if you know ahead of time what you're looking at.
Yeah, it seems to kind of make it easier to find closure, which is so very important. Bushi in the chat room was wondering if you have heard any reports of shadow people from other people in the funeral business, or those connected to people who have passed that are in your funeral home being worked on?
I have had a couple of people over the years tell me that after the fact, after they had this one woman in particular, I remember, told me that for the longest time after she had buried her father was a pipe smoker. And for the longest time after he had passed away, she would be just sitting in her reading room after dinner at night, and then all of a sudden his pipe tobacco would be floating, not visually through the air, but the aroma of his pipe tobacco. And she talked to me several times about that, and she said, and she had never seen him after he passed away, but the aroma of the pipe tobacco had visited her many times, and this went on for many, many months. And then all of a sudden, I think it was about 10 or months later after his death, it just suddenly stopped. And she came to the conclusion that maybe he was still there, his spirit was there, but kind of reluctant to move on. But after a few months, he indeed did that, and that's why the aroma finally left. And that was pretty good. And she was very serious about it as well. She said, I knew my father's pipe tobacco, and I could tell when he was nearby because it was there with him.
Well, yeah, and I find that to be a sign, to me that's a sign of someone coming to visit or to let you know they're okay or they're still around and checking up on you. Because I don't think you do pass, you don't lose that love for someone or that caring or wanting to make sure they're okay. When my mom passed, I had a dream of her coming to me, and one of the main things that she said repeatedly was, I'm okay and everything's going to be okay. So that's one of the big things that I think they do want you to know. And I've heard a lot of stories about people smelling things like pipe tobacco or cigarette smoke or someone's perfume or whatnot. I think it's just another sign of them coming back to see us and let us know they're okay. And I find that comforting that they do come back. I also find it comforting knowing that there is something on the other side. And we won't really know what's there till we're there,
that, yeah, you do hear people telling similar stories about that, and I'm with you there. I agree with you. I think that's a presumption that they are still there nearby, kind of looking around, looking over you, and that they're kind of reassuring you that, you know, physically we may not be here, but spiritually we're still here, looking after you and being with you, and that gives a lot of people a lot of comfort.
And on that note, and I hate to interrupt, we do have to go to our first break, so you guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back right after these messages.
Looking for nighttime adventure? Old school radio that delves into everything out of the norm? Then check us out at Spaced Out Radio. This is Dave Scott. Every Monday through Friday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we're going to take you on a wild ride ranging from conspiracies to true crime and every ghost, alien, and Sasquatch story in between. We're always live, and we're always interactive with you. So join us at spacedoutradio.com, where together, we own the night.
Hey, guess what? You can now get your brand new Spaced Out Radio swag at spacedoutradio.com. We've brought the store back with all new items for you to pick out and pick up for yourself, your family, or friends. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, we got it all. All you have to do is head to our website and click on Store. Choose what you want and it's shipped to you. The Spaced Out Radio store is right there for you. Come shop with us at spacedoutradio.com. Then we can own the night together.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Canada's largest UFO conference is ready to roll in Toronto this September 21st and 22nd at the Alien Cosmic Expo. This year is about the experience. Listen to the stories of Dave Scott, Travis Walton, Paula Harris, Grant Cameron, Ryan Stacey, Richard Dolan, Leslie Mitchell-Clark, and more. Get your tickets now at aliencosmicexpo.com.
Coming soon to our website, spacedoutradio.com, is the SOR Space Travelers Club. For just $5 a month, you can get into a private area on our site where you can hang with other listeners in our chat room, post in our forum, and check out a bunch of exclusive content and store that won't be found anywhere else, including a nightly after-show party with Dave. It's going to be the best $5 a month you're going to spend. The SOR Space Travelers, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
If you're heading to Vancouver, make sure you stop by the official bar of Spaced Out Radio, the Moose Vancouver. It's the place to party in YVR. At the corner of Nelson and Granville, the Moose Vancouver is always up to speed with a kitchen staff that serves great food. All food on the menu, $6.95 to $8.95. There's a reason the Moose Vancouver is recognized as one of the hottest spots on the West Coast. Get your horns up for the Moose Vancouver. Come get spooked at the 4th Annual Forest Moon Paracon in Cedar-Woolley, Washington, Saturday, September 28th. UFOs, ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot. Speakers include Mike Morin and Jason Jordan, R. Keith Andrews, and Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and so much more. There will be workshops and a VIP roundtable. Get early bird tickets now at fmparacon.com.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Every night on Spaced Out Radio, we have places for you to hang out. Hi, this is Carl. Join our SOR Space Travelers group on Facebook for live chat. On Twitter, using hashtag Spaced Out Radio, you can also join us in our Spreaker chat room. Check us out on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR. All of our archives are free on YouTube at Spaced Out Radio. By the way, I'll be watching you at your window until you do. Bye!
Hello, this is your guitar man, Ron Bumblefoot Thaw, and I have to tell you, I love the response I get for Little Brother is Watching from Spaced Out Radio fans. It's amazing how music can inspire and make people think deeper about what's going on in the supernatural world. You can head over to my website, bumblefoot.com, to check out my music, my guitar workshops, my touring, even check out some of the hot sauces that I'm working on. And make sure you keep on listening, because with Spaced Out Radio, you know Little Brother is watching.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
You can follow Tessa on Twitter at TessaTNT, on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now, back to Spaced Out Weekend host, Tessa Nicole Thomas.
Hear the sound again, voices dancing in my head, smile wide, drowning slowly as the air goes round.
Good evening, you guys, and thanks so much for joining us tonight on Spaced Out Radio. It's wonderful to have you, and it's also wonderful to have our guest tonight. And our guest this evening is Stanley Swan, who is not only an Undertaker, but an author. Welcome back, Stanley. It's been great having you this evening.
Thank you, Tessa. I'm enjoying it very much. I wanted to start off this hour with by just saying that the death business, the undertaking business, is not always gloom and dark. A lot of people actually come in, when I've made arrangements over the years with families, would tell jokes during the arrangement process. After we got everything ready for the funeral, people would say, Stan, did you ever hear the one about so-and-so? So people do joke about funeral business. You hear jokes about death and dying. I guess maybe it's a way for a lot of people to kind of lighten the moment, to kind of give themselves a little reprieve from the seriousness of the minute. And there was one quick one here I want to tell you that was given me not too long ago. A funeral service is being held in a church for a woman who had just passed away, and at the end of the service, the pallbearers carrying the casket accidentally bump into a wall, jarring the casket, and they hear a faint moan, and they open the casket and find that the woman is actually alive. Well, she lives for 10 more years and then passes away, and the ceremony is again held at the same church. And at the end, the pallbearers are carrying the casket out the same way they did 10 years before. The husband walking out says, "Watch out for the wall."
I think I've heard that one before, and that kind of goes in league with Nikki's question. So it's so funny that you told that. That is pretty funny. He's like, "Hey, watch out for that wall. I don't want to go through another 10 years."
So we're not all in black suits and constantly wringing our hands, playing the part of the dreary old Undertaker. Although I probably look like that at this point in my life, but we do have some light times in our life.
Definitely, and like you said, it's not always a sad and dark occasion. Sometimes it's a happy, joyful occasion. And Nikki, in league with the joke you just told, was saying, have you experienced a body come in only to find out that that person was still alive due to some strange medical reason?
You mean after death, discovered that they were alive?
Yeah, like after, the family or the practitioner or whatnot, thinking that the person was dead and they're brought to the mortuary or whatnot, then discovering that the person wasn't dead, they were actually alive due to some strange medical reason. Perhaps like sometimes a person's heart rate will go so slow that you can barely tell they're breathing or anything, and then you realize they're alive.
Right. I've never experienced that. I can tell you a couple of quick stories that goes back in history. Years ago, I mean way back, before there were tests for death, which are required now in most medical facilities before a body is released to a funeral home. But many years ago, when they buried a person, I'm going to say in the late 1800s, they would put a bell at the top of the grave with a wire down into the casket, and if the person should come alive because they were comatose or whatever, they could ring the bell to alert someone that they were not dead and had been buried alive. And that goes way back to the 1800s. And then back in even as early as the 1930s and the 1940s, funeral directors performed what they call tests for death. And the tests for death, many decades ago, there were 2 or 3. They would take a feather and put under the person's nose to look for any air movement in or out of the body. And one of the other tests for death was to place a bowl of water on the person's chest and watch for any ripple in the water. Those things were actually used for many years. But now funeral directors, most funeral directors now are supposed to perform tests for death before they start embalming. That would be use of a stethoscope to make sure there's no movement at all there. But before hospitals or nursing homes release bodies to a funeral home now, at least here in the U.S., person has to be pronounced dead by the attending physician or by a coroner. And once that person, is pronounced dead, then they're legally and physically dead. I have heard, though, of a couple of instances where a person has been sent to a mortuary and they indeed were not, physically dead and were brought back. So it has happened.
Yeah, I've heard those stories, and I'm just like, man, I could not imagine how close, they were to being buried alive. And then you also hear, I kind of lost my train of thought there. It's right on it, and then all of a sudden derailed. Yeah, one of the other tests that I was hearing about was like putting the mirror under the nose and seeing if it fogs up at all.
Yep.
And
that one's been used as well. Yep.
And I finally put my train back on the rail. The rule of 3 days, like waiting the 3 days before you bury a person, just to make extra sure that person isn't coming back. They're definitely dead.
Yeah, the old years ago, the funeral process was 3, 4, 5 days long. If you died on a Monday, there was a good chance there would be maybe 2 full days of calling hours, afternoon and evenings, and that would be on day 2 and 3, and you might have a funeral on the 4th day, or maybe even hold over and have a funeral on the 5th day. And that's changed a lot now because very few people have lengthy wake periods anymore. We're living in a very different time where people want to move on quickly, so they may only have maybe an hour or 2 of a viewing and an immediate service the next day, or sometimes no service. And that goes into the whole thing that we can talk about too sometime as we can go through here about the change in people's needs from full ground burial, a traditional burial, to cremation. And those numbers are staggering now, how that continues to change. The numbers keep going way up for cremation.
Yeah, and I've heard that as well, and I've heard people saying because they're running out of room, like in large cities and such, to bury people, and others because it's cheaper and they can afford it and they can take their loved one to places that they want to be, and they can even pick several different places. And then I hear also that it's kind of illegal to spread ashes in certain places because of supposed health hazards and such. Is there really any health hazards as far as spreading ashes? I mean, they're cremated, it burns out any sort of germs or whatnot. Is it just kind of a thought factor, or is it true that it can pollute the ground or stream or whatever they decide to spread it at?
No. There's really no health factor there. Crematories operate usually at a temperature around 1,800 degrees, some a little higher. Cremation process is usually about 2 to 3 hours. And then after those cremains are put into an urn or a container or whatever, most places you can spread them anywhere. I've always advised people to make sure that there's not a local ordinance against spreading cremains. If you're going to put them in a lake or a stream or something, to find out from a local registrar or a clerk to make sure there's no local ordinance against that. But most people will take them out and spread them on a bike path or a place where Dad used to go hunting or go fishing, and or as you mentioned, they will split the cremains up into many small urns, keepsakes we call them. And I've had cremains that I put in as many as maybe 8 or 10 little keepsake containers, and they give them to different family members and take them home and do whatever with them. So most states down here have little regulations about spreading the cremains, but I always tell people to check first with their local people before they do it, just so they don't get in trouble. But technically, there's nothing medically that would hurt anyone. There's nothing there that they could disease or anything that they could possibly catch.
Yeah, and that's what I thought, because I heard that when we were spreading a friend of mine's ashes, and someone was saying, no, we can't spread them here because there's a law against it, so on and so forth. And I'm like, well, thinking deeply into it, there's no way of it being toxic or anything like that, because like you said, they're cremated at a very high degree, and so it takes out basically everything, So I think it's more of like the ooh factor, like, ooh, you just put a body into the lake or whatever, Do you think in your having your education and such that if you do spread ashes in a stream that flows into a river or off a boat into a lake, that if a dog goes searching for remains of someone, they won't pick up on that either, right? Because everything's lost, basically.
I'm not sure I quite understood your question there, Tessa.
So when a person's cremated, we had search dogs appear at a lake, and it kept hitting on the lake, and it was actually looking for a missing kid. And people were thinking, well, maybe it's because somebody spread the ashes at the lake, and the dog's picking up on that. Is that possible, being that they are cremated at a high temperature?
I don't believe that a cadaver dog could pick up with that. I don't know that there would be any kind of a scent on a cremain that a cadaver dog could pick up. I can't speak to that because I'm really not that familiar with the dogs. We use dogs. We used cadaver dogs in Katrina in Mississippi during Katrina. When I was down there, we used them for searching for remains. But I don't think a dog would pick up cremains. I don't think that they would, unless that's, dogs have that seventh sense, we call it,
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there is something that they could pick up from cremains, but I don't know if it's scientifically possible or not.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking so either, but I was thinking, well, you're educated on this, so you would know the answer. Well, Everett was wondering, in your opinion, Stanley, how has the general public's view of death changed over the years?
The general public's view?
Uh-huh.
Well, I touched a little bit on it last hour. We're in a rush society today. You see it everywhere, every day. People are spending less time taking care of their dead. They want to move through the process quickly today, and a lot of it's job consideration, which is understandable. Sometimes it's financial, which is also understandable. People, we're in a rush time now. People want to do everything quickly. They want to move on to the next thing on their day or evening, and that means spending less time funeralizing. They don't want to have 2 or 3 days of calling hours. They want to do it in one day or in a couple of hours. Have the funeral quickly. Some people don't wish to have a funeral. You're seeing less and less funeral processions, as we call them. Years ago, every day or 2 or 3 times a week, you could see a hearse going down the road with its lights on, followed by 20 or 30 cars with their lights on going to the cemetery. You don't see that anymore. You just don't see that as often as you used to see it. It was a common thing, and now it's very rare that cemeteries, even people want to go to the cemetery. And I find that's kind of sad. I think we're not taking the time to memorialize that person's life, to remember that person's life. Doesn't mean you have to spend $20,000 on a funeral to have a nice funeral, but to take the time to remember that person, spend some time with that person, have the family together, remember that person, what they did. But people are doing less of that. They're just doing a lot less of that now. And that's why the cremation rates are very high now. So,
well, I agree with that, how people are in a rush to just kind of get things over with. Here in Colorado, I've seen several processions, and people who have respect and know what's going on will pull over to the side of the road and not even knowing that person show their respect by stopping and giving that moment of silence and letting that person pass. But then, like you said, a lot of people are so in a rush that I've seen people also passing the procession and continuing on wherever they go. I'm like, can you just wait a few minutes and let this person continue on their way? Like, this is basically their last moments for people to be honoring them, and so on and so forth. Like, can you not just pull over for a minute? The world's not going to end if you don't, you know?
Yeah, we're in a hurry today, and that's just kind of the way we live. And I don't think it's going to go back to the old days. I don't see it going back. It's just the world we live in today. You know, with our younger people having computers in kindergarten, I mean, we were playing with blocks in kindergarten when I was a kid, and we're just into a new age now. So the funeral business has had to change with that, and we're doing more immediate burials, you know, within a day or so now. And when I started in the business almost 40 years ago, the cremation rate in New York State was at about 2%, and now it's at about 50%. And 50% is about is the running percentage for most states now. California is well over 50 to 60% up in cremation. More people are choosing cremation. And it's a lot of it's because of the time situation. Some of it's financial, and they want to move through the death experience quickly, and that's now where we're at. And I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised when my dad told me that when he passed, he wanted to be cremated, and I was very surprised that he would pick that. He was raised LDS. He didn't participate in the church a lot of his life, but he was raised up that way and still had a lot of the same beliefs. And so I thought he wanted to be buried, but, you know, we had the discussion because his health was not good, and he said he wanted to be cremated, which ended up working out perfectly because he, like I said, went all the way to Denver, and we're down in the lower southwest corner of Colorado. So sometimes it is the financial issue, but more and more people that I talk to today do want to be cremated. And the whole thing about the bugs and all this other stuff is their reason, or they want to be spread in different places and not just buried in a hole. And so there are different thoughts, different changes, and like you said earlier, like spirituality and the belief system, so on and so forth. And sometimes it's like there's not enough room in certain places, like and that's when they go to mausoleums and such, right? They start burying above ground instead of below ground.
Yeah, if you would, some of the major cities have, you know, they're coming into space problems now. There are a couple of major cemeteries in New York City, in the metropolitan area, that are burying 4, 5, and 6 deep, you know, in one lot. So there are space considerations. But in most of the country, space is not a real problem. In the rural areas, it's not a problem at all, space-wise for full burials. But in the metro areas, space is definitely getting to be a consideration. And then you've got a lot of the younger people are in the green theme now, where they want to go, you know, everything to be green, environmentally friendly, and they don't believe that putting embalming chemicals in a body and then putting that in a steel or a metal casket in the ground and concrete vaults surrounding it is they don't like the idea of that, because you're putting all that into the ground that's going to be there for potentially eons, you know, as opposed to something green like being cremated is a greener thing and more eco-friendly for a lot of younger people. That's the way they think now.
Yeah, and there, like you were saying earlier, there is a different thought process on things, and people are going greener today. Nikki in the chat room asked, have you experienced a body come in only to find out that the person... Nope, I already did that one, sorry. Have you ever had any unusual requests regarding how a person's loved one was worked on, or for cremation or for burial?
What was the last part of that? Any particular that they wanted for?
Any unusual requests regarding how a person's cared for or worked on for cremation or for burial?
Oh, about as far as their physical appearance?
I think what she's getting at is like weird requests. Anything strange and unusual that a family member will request for a deceased family member before cremation or burial?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, I have a list in front of me. A lot. You didn't know what you're going to get into tonight, did you, Tessa?
Well, I'm glad you came prepared. You must have been a Boy Scout when you were younger.
As a matter of fact, I was.
See, I knew it.
A lot of people request particular things that was that person who passed away. If they wore their hair a certain way, naturally they want it that way. Certain clothes that they wore, they want to repeat that upon death. And a lot of people will want to bury particular things with their family member, either in a casket or, if they're cremated, put mementos in an urn. And this goes way back to the Egyptians. When someone died, they would put someone in a pyramid with all their possessions. And so it's not unusual now for funeral directors to have families bring things in to be buried with a person before they're actually physically buried. So I kind of made a list a few years ago of some of the things that I put in with people, and I think you'll find these interesting, many of them amusing. These are things that I've either buried or either put in a casket or with an urn before burial. Coins in a pocket to cover the first bet at the racetrack. A six-pack of beer. A bottle of scotch. 2 6-packs of beer. Unusual things, a hockey stick. A check for $250. Must be the friend owed him money.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. A fork in the lady's hand. I'll come back to that in a minute. There's an interesting story about that. Next of kin pictures are very, very normal. A fishing pole, crucifixes naturally, a bowling pin, decks of cards, flasks, candy bars, a bowling ball. That was an interesting day. I will never forget that.
Right.
Clean socks, a highway map. Afghans' books and Bibles are very normal. A flashlight, records and tapes, a church key. Do you know what a church key is?
No.
I don't know if you're old enough to know what a church key is. Years ago, before bottles were open with a twist top, you had to have a device to open a bottle or a can, and it was called a church key. It was rounded on one end and pointed on the other end.
Okay.
And that was called the church key. Dominoes, hand trowel, pet cremains, fortune cookies, toys, Hot Wheels, die-cast, stuffed animals, jewelry. I wanted to talk about that too, about jewelry. A Rubik's Cube. They figure they have a lot of time to figure it out.
Yeah.
String puppet, cough drops, a mirror, baseball, package seeds, Star Wars lightsaber, a pen and note paper. The Star Wars thing is funny because we talked before we went on tonight about, Star Wars this week. It was not
today.
Too long ago.
Yeah, today was the 4th. For
Yeah,
you, it's no longer the 4th, but for me, it still is. And the whole May the 4th be with you is a big thing today.
Yeah. We buried a young man not too many years ago who was then probably in his 30s, and he wanted his whole Star Wars shirts on and some of his collectibles with him, and so that's what went with him. So people bury things with their family members that were them. But the story about the fork in the hand, you've never heard that, no?
No.
This goes way back to probably 3, 4, 5 decades. A woman had a fork in her hand during calling hours, and the people would come in, and I've actually done this at least once, maybe twice in my career, where a lady's fork was in the hand during calling hours, and the people would walk up to the family and say, "Why does Mildred have a fork in her hand?" And the family would say, "Well, Mildred went to all the church suppers, and, you know, she loved to eat," and she said, and they always said when they picked up the plate before dessert came, they would say, "Keep your fork, because the best is yet to come."
Oh.
So having the fork in the hand means the best is yet to come. It's a nice story.
Yeah, it's very cool. I like that.
And that's old. That's old Stan. You told you that one today.
I learned something from old Stan.
Yeah. So so people do have particular things they want their family members to be buried in, or in some cases not buried in. I had a lady years ago who came in, and I think this story is in the book as well. She didn't. She said, "Do I have to have pants to bury my husband in?" I said, "Well, I guess not." So we buried him with just his underwear on. He had a coat and a shirt and a nice tie and a coat top, a sport coat on, but from the waist down you couldn't see because of the way the casket was built. So we buried the man with no pants. And people says, "Is that legal?" Well, yeah, it's legal.
Well, yeah, and he's covered. He's not offending anyone with his body parts. I mean, you can see the top portion, but you don't see the lower portion, so I could see how that would make sense. Perhaps he spent his last years or whatnot in his underoos, and he no longer fit in his pants or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and people want their people to be comfortable. People say, "Oh, my dad worked on the farm his whole life. He's 90 years old, and he only wore a suit twice in his life. Do we have to put him in a suit?" No, of course not. You put him in what he was comfortable in. So lots of times we would bury people in, you know, what they worked in. They had their nice clean clothes, maybe a nice shirt with suspenders and a pair of dress pants, and a woman with a sweater and a blouse and a skirt. And you don't have to buy a $300 suit to bury someone in if it was something they weren't used to be. I wouldn't want to lay for eternity in something that I didn't wear all the time and be uncomfortable. So I tell people to use something that the person was most recognizable in, you know?
Yeah. And I don't know if it's really, because we leave our physical bodies, you know, it's just a vessel, but it is that thought there, and just to have that thought that they are comfortable in their final resting place would be pretty important.
Yeah, I think so. It would be for me. And you know, I think most people that we used to talk to about that, when they'd ask about clothing, and they'd appreciate you telling them that, and I'd say, "Oh, wow, good," because I didn't really want to have them in this or that if it wasn't really their thing, you know. So, and now we're coming into the new age where you're going to see probably everything, you know, from piercings and tattoos and pink hair and all those things, and people will go out in what they are comfortable in. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, there's so many different styles and fashion statements going on, which there always have been different things throughout the years, but we really are in a new age. How long ago did you quit doing undertaking?
I retired for 4.5 years ago.
Okay, so you haven't been...
Yeah, I'm still licensed here in New York State. I'm not practicing right now, but I'm still licensed. And I go out, I do a lot of speaking at a lot of different groups. And I started writing Undertakings about 8-9 years ago, and it was published in 2015. And then a year or two ago, I started writing the short story book, Tales Unleashed, and that was just published less than 2 months ago, and I'm having a ball with that one. So that's a short story book, fiction short stories. And so I've kind of gone from undertaking full-time to now more writing and speaking full-time in my almost retirement age.
Right. Well, that's awesome, and I did get to read your Tales Unleashed, and you know, I love paranormal or supernatural, aka ghost stories. And another thing that I loved about this book was, like you just said, it was short stories, and they were really well written and to the point, and I really did enjoy reading them.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. When I wrote Tales Unleashed, I wanted to go back to, it's a smaller book in size than Undertakings. The Tales Unleashed is the 5.5 by 7. It was the old pocket-sized book that you used to buy as a kid, paperbacks, and you could put it in your back pocket or put it in your purse. And I told my publisher, I said, I want that same pocket book feel I had when I was a kid. So we came up. It's a standard paperback like they used to make years ago, and it was fun to write the book. And I've had a lot of good feedback with the book. People like the short stories are fun because you can read a couple quick stories and lay down and take a nap, or read a couple on your way to work while you're on the train. And so I've had really good response with the book so far, so I'm excited about it. It's doing very well.
And we do still have questions in the chat room, but I did want to ask you a few questions about your Tales Unleashed. Did these stories just come from your own imagination, or did some of them come from some of the people that you had taken care of, like kind of like an inspiration to you in these stories you had written? Where did these stories come from?
Yeah, a good question, too. I've always been a big fan of kind of spooky, eerie stories. Alfred Hitchcock in the 50s and the 60s, I followed him in his writing and his movies. And then followed by, I was the biggest fan probably ever of Rod Serling, creator of Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I was watching that the last 2 weeks at work.
Rod Serling was just, he was a tremendous talent. He grew up in Syracuse, not too far from, maybe 2 hours from where I live. Spent time in World War II, went to college in Ohio, lived on Cayuga Lake here in New York State. Started in radio and started writing back in the 40s and the 50s. He became a freelancer, and then in 1955, Serling got a program on craft television theater and wrote a lot of great movies. And then the Twilight Zone series that he had from October of '59 to 1964. He wrote 159 episodes of Twilight Zone, and then he got into his Night Gallery series in 1969, and he taught at Ithaca College, not too far from where I live, and passed away in 1975 at age 50. And I visited his grave. He is buried about an hour and a half from where I live in a little town called Interlaken, New York. And I was up there last fall and visited where Rod Serling is buried, and that was on my bucket list for years to go there. And it was an awesome day just to be in his presence. Although I'm above ground and he was below, just to be there near Rod Serling was a real thrill. So I'd always emulated his talents in his writing. So a lot of the things that I'd written over the years, I kind of thought about how would Rod Serling write this story. So some of my writing is might mimic some of the things the way he actually told the story. But most of the stories in Tales Unleashed, I would be driving around a rural country road out here in New York State and see something and say, this would make a good storyline for this or that. So there's some interesting stories in that book. There's a few on time travel, going ahead in time and back in time. There's a story about a UFO encounter of a young couple who actually retained some proof of that encounter.
Yeah, I read that one. That was one of my favorites. I was like, not only is he writing about ghosts and stuff, he's writing about UFOs and UFO experiences.
There's a couple stories about disappearances. A girl entrance to what I call the second level after an almost fatal car crash, and then comes back. A young skater in Pennsylvania who's skating on ice and sees the face of a young gal under the ice where she's skating, and a fortune teller's marble. There's a few creepy stories in there, but it's pretty entertaining. I think it's a good book, and I've had really good luck with it so far. So
yeah,
and I keep thinking of new.
Oh, go ahead.
I keep thinking of new things to come up with, so I'll just. I'm working on a novel right now, but it's going to be a Western about an Undertaker in Tucson in 1885.
That should be very interesting.
So I've got probably 2/3 of that written. I've been at that quite a while, and I'm hoping I'll get that finished before my own demise, but we'll see.
One of my friends that was on the show not too long ago, R.L. Poole, and he wrote a book on the Coral Castle, Decoding the Coral Castle, I think it was called, and that was one of his lines when we were talking. 1 foot in the grave and one on a banana peel. It's like you never know, when it's going to happen, and maybe I'll get this done by then. But going back to all the stories that you named off right now, I was sitting earlier and thinking, okay, well, what if he asked me what my favorite stories out of his book are, and it's funny how you're naming these off, and those were like some of my top stories that I had read out of your book. You're talking about the girl ice skating and seeing the girl under the pond with the curly blonde hair and stuff, and she had been lost for like 3 decades. That was one of my favorites, and basically everyone you named was like on my top list, so I'm glad you named those because those are really good ones. And I do implore our listeners to go out and get this book, and when a book is short and sweet, sometimes the shorter the better. And this one, like I said, is short and to the point. And like you said, with the creator of Twilight Zone, which was another point that I tried to say, but I didn't want to interrupt you. When you sent me that picture of you at his graveside there, I was so jealous. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I want to go do that someday. That's pretty awesome that you were able to take that off your bucket list and be that close to him, so to speak.
Yeah, If anybody was a Rod Serling or Twilight Zone fan, if you ever venture down to New York State, you can go on Google and look for his burial site at Interlaken. There's a small cemetery in Interlaken, and it's a fascinating place to go. And I could tell the minute that I arrived there that other people had been there, because when I actually found where he was buried and found his stone, his flat grave marker, other people who'd been there had left things, which was really cool. They left a couple of pictures and a few little painted stones and marbles and mementos of him in this TV show, and it was like, wow. It was like it was a real thrill to be there. It really was. And anybody who comes down there should, which proved when I went through there that I wasn't the only one interested in where he was, because a lot of other people had visited him before I got there. It was a pretty cool place.
Yeah, and like you said, him and Alfred Hitchcock were really big parts of our lives growing up. They were a big part of my life. After my mom passed, my dad would work and we'd be home, and one of the things I'd entertain myself with was Alfred Hitchcock, and then the Twilight Zone. And when my mom was here on Earth, that was some of the ways we'd spend our time is watching scary movies. So I even still do that to this day. I'll read something scary to get myself to sleep, or Twilight Zone, I'll watch that, or Alfred Hitchcock or something scary to get to sleep. It's kind of like comforting to me, which is weird to some people, but to me it's a comfort. It's something that I'm used to and that I really enjoy.
Yeah, the Alfred Hitchcock, two of his best movies I ever thought were The Birds, you remember that,
Yeah.
and Psycho. Psycho and The Birds, two are the best Hitchcock movies ever. He had a lot of other good movies, North by Northwest, Rear Window, Vertigo. Hitchcock, the thing about Hitchcock was he was kind of an odd fellow. If you watch some of his things on YouTube, he a lot of people don't know it. He actually played a cameo spot. He had a cameo appearance in a lot of his movies. He would just be standing on a corner, and all of a sudden the camera would sweep by him, and a lot of people didn't recognize him, but there was Alfred Hitchcock in some of his own movies.
And it's funny how newer writers like Stephen King and such will do the same thing in their movies. He'll play a small part.
Yep.
Or be seen in that movie, and it makes you wonder, did he take that from Alfred Hitchcock? Because he did do the same thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating to study these people and the things that they did. That became almost ritualistic for them. It was something they had to be involved with. It's part of their writing and production process.
Yeah, it kind of makes one want to go back and watch them again to see, did I miss him in this one, or which ones exactly did he show up in? So it's kind of cool. I actually received an Alfred Hitchcock box set during a Christmas party, and they call it an elephant party, where you bring something from your house and exchange it with somebody else as a Christmas gift. You don't have to go out and buy it. You just exchange it. And I got the Alfred Hitchcock series, which I was totally happy to have. That was like one of the best presents I'd had in a long time.
Yeah, a lot of fun. I want to give out my, I've got a writing blog and an email address I'd like to get out there.
Oh, yeah,
So
go ahead.
If people would like to drop me a note, I get a lot of mail from around wherever, and I always respond to people. And my email address is undertakings, plural, undertakings at inbox.com. Undertakings, plural, at inbox.com. My writing site is myundertakings.blogspot, blogsspot.com. myundertakings.blogspot.com. And I do quite a bit of writing on there, one or two entries, usually a week, funeral-related, disappearances, missing people, unsolved cases, some pretty interesting reading there. Some historical funeral things on there as well. So I think people find that interesting if they check that out once in a while.
Well,
But
yeah,
I like hearing from people. I love to hear
missing persons cases and such. Those are some of the scariest stories because they're true, you know?
Yeah, they really are. It's fascinating to follow some of these cases.
And you try to piece it together and find different things that somebody else didn't find, and just hope for an outcome for it, because there's so many people out there dependent on this person being found to find closure and peace in their life. But there are so many people out there, and there's more and more missing all the time.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder. You know, you read about these people who are all of a sudden just gone, and with no explanation. Where did this person go? It's like they just started out for work and never heard from again. Never seen again. No trace of the person. And that kind of makes you wonder, what happened to that person. And there's some fascinating studies out there about missing people. Unsolved crimes. Those things have always fascinated me, and they're just fun to read and to explore and to re-explore and to see if updates are being made on any of those things. And it's fascinating reading.
Bougie in the chat room was asking, have you seen any UFOs over the mortuary house or crematorium? No. No UFO
experience. I've never seen one. My brother saw one years ago and gave me a pretty good read about it, story told about it. But I've never seen anything UFO related around my funeral home or cemetery that I've been in. And I've been in a lot of cemeteries over 37 years, but never encountered anything out of the ordinary there.
Yeah, I think that with UFOs and such, they are more interested in the living and not so much the dead. Ad Gnome was asking or saying, when I go, I want to be cremated and thrown over the Grand Canyon. Are there laws against that? There's ways that he can look that up online, correct?
Yes. See, Tessa, most states, every state, the funeral business and funeral homes and crematories are licensed by their respective state's Department of Health. And most Department of Health in those states have a Bureau of Funeral Directing, most states. So you can usually go to the state you live in and Google up the state's Bureau of Funeral Directing or Health Department, state's Health Department, and ask specific questions about, placement of cremains, whether or not they can be spread over this place or that place. And you will probably not find too many ordinances in place. They're generally more concerned about public waterways, where the waterways might actually be used for drinking purposes, but somebody doesn't want to drink their water that's been at cremation spread, although there's, chemically nothing there that would hurt anyone, but they don't want that to happen. So I always tell people to check, locally to see before they spread cremains. As far as the Grand Canyon goes, that's something, again, you could check online to see if there's anything against that. But there are flying services around the country on both east and west coasts that take cremains out to spread over both oceans. So there are people out there that will spread cremains if they want them spread wherever.
Yeah, I remember before my dad passed, we had a long time to plan certain things, and I was getting creative with it, and I was wanting to send his ashes into space because that was a service that is provided. You can send your loved one's ashes into space. And so I was like, Dad, I have the coolest thing. I decided that I'm going to send your ashes into space. And I thought he was going to be excited about it, but he's like, no, don't do that. I just want to be buried with your mom. I was like, really? I mean, that would be cool. Because we're all like,
yeah.
You hear the whole line, we're all stardust. Like, you can go back into space and be stardust again. But he's like, no, I just want to be buried with your mom. And I'm like, well, that's going to be much cheaper. So I guess that's cool. Whatever you want. And that brings me to the point of a lot of people don't really care about the laws and guidelines of the state. They are just trying to honor their loved one. And if it really comes down to it, they'll sneak out there and they'll do it anyways.
Yeah, a lot of people will do that. They say, this is where Dad went on a walk every day out along the sidewalk down by the river, and that's where he sat and fished, and that's where I'm going to put his cremains. So they just go out and do it, and you very rarely ever hear of any repercussions coming about because of those things. There's really not. I've never seen anybody that calls themselves the cremation police.
Right.
Policing. You can't spread those cremains out here. I think they have other more important things to do than worry about that.
Yeah, I was worried because I had to ride the bus from Colorado to Arkansas to take my dad's ashes out there, and in Albuquerque, they do a check of all your belongings, and I'm like, man, like they're probably going to make me open this urn, because what better place to put drugs and stuff than in an urn and say, oh no, this is my dad's ashes, and do it that way.
Right.
But I was like, do you want me to open this? And I thought for sure they were going to say yeah, but they didn't. They were really cool, and they were like, no, don't worry about it. And I was like, oh, thank goodness,
Yeah.
So that was a worry.
I usually caution people when they're going to take an urn with cremains somewhere. If they're going to transport them on what they call a common carrier, whether that be a train, plane, auto, bus, something like that, that they have a copy of the death certificate with them, or a copy of what they call a burial permit. Most states have what they call a burial permit that would stay with the cremains until they're actually buried somewhere, and then you actually would have to hand that permit into a cemetery, saying this is such and such a person. I always tell people it's nice to have something on paper with them in case they're questioned. Then they can actually show proof of death.
Yeah, and that's a good idea. And things are kind of foggy to me because that time was really difficult. I don't remember if I had the death certificates at that point or if I had them later, but that would have been a really good thing to take with me. But on that note, we have to go to our second break. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages.
Come get spooked at the 4th Annual Forest Moon Paracon in Cedar-Woolley, Washington, Saturday, September 28th. UFOs, ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot. Speakers include Mike Morin and Jason Jordan, R. Keith Andrews, and Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and so much more. There will be workshops and a VIP roundtable. Get early bird tickets now at fmparacon.com.
Coming up this September 21st and 22nd, all UFO eyes will be focused on Toronto for the 4th Annual Alien Cosmic Expo. Come listen to some of the biggest names and experiencers in ufology. Travis Walton, Paul Hellyer, Richard Dolan, Paula Harris, Grant Cameron, Randy Kramer, and Spaced Out Radio's own Dave Scott. Tickets are on sale now at aliencosmicexpo.com.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for a night on the town? The Moose Vancouver is the bar that never stops rocking until 2 a.m. every night. The Moose has great food with everything on the menu from $6.95 to $8.95. Fantastic, vibrant staff and rock and roll that will bring you back to when the music was real, the hair was long, and the guitars were rockin'. Get your party on at the Moose Vancouver, the official party bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Get your horns up with me on Spaced Out Radio. This is Ron Bumblefoot Thal. Come tune in to SOR where you can hear me rock out with Little Brother Is Watching, the official theme song of Spaced Out Radio. And then come on over to bumblefoot.com where you can find out about my tour schedule, my music, and everything else. Bumblefoot.com keeps you up to date on what I'm doing and the best way to stay in touch with my music and music camps. Sign up for my newsletter at bumblefoot.com and remember, Little Brother Is Watching.
Come get spooked at the 4th Annual Forest Moon Paracon in Cedar-Woolley, Washington, Saturday, September 28th. UFOs, ghosts, aliens, Bigfoot. Speakers include Mike Morin and Jason Jordan, R. Keith Andrews, and Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and so much more. There will be workshops and a VIP roundtable. Get early bird tickets now at fmparacon.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Hi there, this is Geraldine Orozco from San Francisco's Bay Area Meditation. I invite you to join me the first Tuesday of every month with Dave Scott for Spaced Out Radio's The Spiritual You. In this fast-paced world we live in, it's time for you to take some time for you. We'll cover every possible subject from powerful meditation to healing techniques to your own intuition and spirituality. So come join us for The Spiritual You.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel, the freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social media freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
Come hang out with Spaced Out Radio, where we own the night. This is Carl. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and during the show, use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio to chat with us live. On Instagram, at Dave Scott SOR. On Facebook, give our page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. SOR archives are free on YouTube at Spaced Out Radio. Come join us, or I will come join you. See you at your window.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
We are getting ready to relaunch the SOR Space Travelers Club at spacedoutradio.com. For $5 a month, you can join us for a plethora of features found nowhere else. Hang out in a private chat room during the show and after party. You can check out some exclusive content and a store specifically for you, as well as a private listener forum where you can post your thoughts, stories, and pictures. The SOR Space Travelers Club, coming soon to spacedoutradio.com.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday, you can come hang out with me and the other space travelers. We have it all from Carl the Alien bouncing on by to those misfit gnomes causing havoc. It's 3 hours of fun and entertainment on those topics the mainstream really doesn't want to touch. Come get all paranormal with us at spacedoutradio.com, and together, my friends, along with our resident guitar god Bumblefoot, we own the night.
Sit back, relax, grab a drink, and listen closely. Spaced Out Radio continues through the weekend. From the mile-high mountains of Colorado to you, listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Weekend with Tessa Nicole Thomas.
Hey guys, welcome back, and thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Tonight we are joined by Stanley Swan, the Undertaker. Stanley, welcome back. It's been wonderful having you on this evening.
Well, thank you, Tessa. I've enjoyed it very, very much, and you've had a lot of good questions sent into you tonight, so I've enjoyed answering them as best I could.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying them because I have more. Okay, so Bougie was the one who had asked about the UFOs and such over the crematorium. He also followed up with, or animals behaving strangely, which we did have the cat that walked in and kind of made its path to places unknown to him, but he felt like he knew where he was going. Or owls was another one. And an owl is considered an animal, but...
Yeah, it's funny that should come up. Two things about on the animal end of it. The owl as many times I've had a couple, 3 families tell me that they had a visit from an owl shortly before a death in their family. And I thought that was unusual because I've heard that at least twice, that an owl had hooted and came very near the house, or actually on a porch, before a death at this particular house. So I've experienced that at least twice. The other thing that I've had some attention to was dogs' response to death. Over the years, I've had maybe a half a dozen families, or maybe 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that realm, where the dog was very close to their master that had passed away. So the family had asked if they could bring the dog in prior to public calling hours so the dog could visit with the person who had passed. I said, certainly. So we would, open the door a little earlier for that family member to come in with a dog, and we would put a couple of chairs up next to the casket so the dog could get up there. In one case, one was a shepherd, a German shepherd, and I think the other one was another big dog. It was maybe some type of a hound dog. But both dogs that had come in, that I had experienced over the years, came up to the casket, immediately, of course, recognized their master that was lying there in the casket, gave a couple of snips around, but immediately sensed that this person was no longer here, that they were dead. Didn't cry, didn't bark, didn't whine, just sat there for a moment, very reverently, and then got off the chairs and went and laid down by the casket. And I saw that at least, as I say, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. But they I've always thought that dogs have a 7th sense, a 6th or 7th sense. I think they do. And it was kind of interesting to actually see that happen.
Yeah, and I've seen videos of dogs doing the same thing. There was even a cat that was fighting to stay on the grave because a family member kept grabbing it by the arm and dragging it off, and it would fight and kind of lay there and make its way, like pushing itself, laying down back onto the grave, because they do have feelings and they do love that person in their life just like the person in their life loves them. Like, it's just basically another family member for us, and for them the same. They go through the loss as well, and it's interesting, and it kind of reiterates that they do have feelings and they do care for us when they do show emotion just like we do. It's very interesting and intriguing, and it just, makes your heart hurt. It's like, oh my gosh, these poor critters, and they do have that true love.
Yeah, a lot of people think that animals don't have feelings or a soul, but I believe they do. I believe that animals do have feelings, and that they actually do have a soul and connects. I've had dogs in the past, and my beagles were like my own kids, and
babies.
Yeah, and I think if I had a certain emotion, they seem to be able to react to that emotion, whatever it was.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There was many times in the past, like my dog Gilly, she's 18, almost 19 years old now, and she's been with me through a lot of hardships, and one of them being when my dad passed, and I'd come home, be sad, go out and sit on the porch on a step, and she'd sit right next to me and kind of lean on me and basically asking me if I'm okay and trying to comfort me and such. They do care about us. They do want to make us feel better, and when we're sad, they're sad. And it's very interesting to see that link and that bridge, between us and our little fur babies, so to speak.
Yep.
Everett was wondering, what is the most unorthodox or lighthearted thing that you have done to bridge your personal life with your work life?
Lighthearted, huh? I don't know. I guess maybe my hobbies. I collected toys for quite a few years, which I enjoyed, and I still have. I don't spend a lot of time with them. I got into flying radio-controlled aircraft a few years ago, and been in that for close to 40 years. Actually founded a radio-controlled club in a place that didn't have one years ago. So that kind of helps ease the tension, I guess, of the daily stress of being in the funeral business, because the funeral business is so unpredictable. I remember one night we'd get calls from a coroner in the middle of the night saying that, so-and-so, there's been a car crash and there's got 2 or 3 deceased people at the scene, and you go out there and you might actually know the person or two, and that's just like, wow. Again, that's the life of being in a smaller town funeral business where maybe 90% of the people that you were taking care of.
Do you have to?
Maybe that's what.
Do you have
why
to
I got
walk
white
away?
hair.
Sorry, go ahead.
My hair turned gray quicker than normal.
Right. It's not genetics. It's stress. Well, I was going to ask, do you have to, when you're in that situation and you do know the person, do you have to walk away for a moment to collect yourself and go back and do your work? How do you actually deal with that?
Yeah, you really do, and it's a state of the mind. You really have to treat every death that you handle at your funeral home as a case call. What they call a case call. It has a case number. Every call that came in, we would, for instance, this year, if I was still in business, it would be case number would start with the year 2019 dash whatever, and it would be call number 1-345 whatever. In New York State, you had to physically keep a file on every call that you do, even though electronically you may have it on a computer. You still have to keep a paper file on each case. So you had to treat each case independently, and you kind of had to step back away from it, especially when you got into a situation where you might have had a younger death, and here you've got a young person in your preparation room. You're getting ready to embalm a body, and you have to just maybe step away from time to time and collect your thoughts and concentrate on what you're doing and bring about the best results, and put your training to work to bring about the best results you can for the family. The ultimate for a funeral director is to return that person to the family if they want to see this person, is to bring that person to the same degree of being as normal as possible after death. And that's sometimes very difficult depending on the cause of death. Some people really look terrible at the time of death. I mean, they're emaciated, they've lost weight, they have no color. They look terrible. And so many times people will come into a funeral home and see the person after they're embalmed, and with some very light makeup. I never used a lot of makeup. The embalming process puts the color back into the tissues now. The embalming process is so good compared to what it used to be. People would come in and say, "Oh, she looks fantastic." And it gives you great feelings when people come in and compliment how good someone looks dead, if you want to use that expression. But so many times people will say that. Say they look so much better than they did when I last saw them.
Right.
And that's what it's all about for a funeral director, to have someone say that they look really good, because then they know they've done their job, and that's their job, to give that family some peace.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I'm so glad that you're able to do that for people. And like you said, sometimes less is more. You don't want to overdo it and make them look like Mimi off the Drew Carey show or whatever. You want them to look their best and just put that color of life back in them, because perhaps last time that person saw this person, you get the darkness around the eyes and other things going on because the health deterioration and different things going on that really wreak havoc on the body. And for you to be able to put that color back in their face and make them look exuberant or youthful or whatnot, it's very awesome to be able to do that.
There are some great embalming fluids on the market now. The funeral directors around the world are using. There's a lot of new fluids with different colors, and you can. If I've got a man who was a farmer out in the sun his entire life, I would not use the same embalming fluid for him that I would use for a little old lady who was a different color and texture of skin. So a good embalmer will pick out the right fluid he thinks is going to work for that particular body and the cause of death. And you can have some extremely good results in embalming today. And people say, "Why do you use a lot of makeup?" No, I don't use a lot of makeup, because if the embalming is good, you're putting the color back into the tissue, in the tissues itself, and that's it's come a long way in the last 40, 50 years.
So it's kind of like a science of embalming. They've come up with this epic solution of making them look.
Yep, it really is a science.
Wow,
it really is a science indeed. Yeah.
Julian Latour was wondering, do people ever want to try their coffin? Like, have you had people that know they're going to die and they set up their funeral arrangements and they want to try their coffin on? Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah. To the extent where people would come in to make a pre-arrangement, as they call it, for themselves, and they would maybe start looking at a casket in advance. And then we would go through and show them the difference between a wood casket and a metal casket, the different features, depending on what they're looking at for a casket. And I actually have had people who would open a casket up and look at the interior on the inside. That's very, very normal for people to come in and look at the interior and feel of it, see what it looks like and feels like. And I've actually had a few over the years who would, look at this. Most caskets have like a mattress spring, in the bottom of the casket. That's maybe 3 inches off the bottom of the casket. So it actually does have a little spring action when you push down on the bed of the casket. So I've actually had people over the years come in and actually look at the mattress in the casket. And, but I don't remember. I've had a couple of people joke about it. If you want to jump in and see how and get the fit, but I never had anybody actually wanted to actually get in it prior to their death. But the consumer today, as I said earlier, they're pretty sharp now, and they look pretty close at merchandise and ask a lot more questions than they used to about how they're made, how long they're going to last, that sort of thing. It's really interesting to talk to people about the products now.
For sure, definitely a different breed. And then there's people that are into the whole vampire era thing. Have you had people come in and purchase caskets to sleep in at home because they want to go with the whole vampire thing?
I have had people, and it's always around Halloween. I have had people over the years, a week prior to Halloween, wanting to know if they could rent a casket.
Oh, no.
A lower-end wood casket to use to put either in their lawn or to stand up against their house, for them to stand in to scare kids when they walk by. I never actually rented any out, but the price is kind of prohibitive, I mean...
yeah, now you got me thinking, is that possible? Can I decorate my yard like that?
So, yeah, if people ask about things like that, but I've never actually sold any caskets prior to death to be used for anything. But I do know one fella many years ago purchased a casket from me to use as a gun storage.
Oh wow!
To put his long guns in. Yeah, he wanted a steel casket. He was going to redo the interior and put locks on the outside, and he wanted it to store his firearms. And I actually got a casket for him to do that. And he, I don't think I ever went back to see what he finally did with it, but he did use it for that. That's what he wanted the product for. So yeah.
Well, and there are people out there that can build those things. For my father-in-law, one of his grandsons built his wooden casket, and he actually did this really nice liner and everything. So you can make one on your own. It's just a matter of finding the time, because like you said, today is a different time. It's hard to find time in this day and age, and for him to be able to do that was pretty cool. But it is possible to build your own.
Yeah, people do that. People do make their own caskets from time to time, and more than that, they make their own urns for cremains.
Oh wow!
I've had a lot of people over the years bring in their own urns that they have either made or they purchased elsewhere. Because you can buy anything online now. You can buy, and you can go to Amazon. You can buy caskets online. You can buy urns online. I've had people many years bring in some interesting boxes to put their cremains in. I had one fellow years ago bring in a nail box that was from like 1890. That was one of his father's antique collectible things. It was a small nail box that was made 150 years ago, and he said, Dad said when he died he wanted his ashes put in this nail box. So we did. He brought it in, and we put his dad's ashes in the mailbox, and he took them home. So he was happy.
Yeah, it's awesome, and it's wonderful when you can give the person in your life that you love what they want at the end of their time.
Yep.
Everett
That's
Themer. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You got another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, Everett Themer was asking, Stanley, can you tell the story about the unknown man buried in the cemetery in Andover, New York?
About what again?
The unknown.
The unknown.
Yeah, the unknown man buried in the cemetery in Andover, New York.
That is the town where we had our funeral home. And
oh, nice.
Yeah, Andover, New York. It's a great little village. We were there for 20-plus years, and a great town. And I actually miss Andover a great deal. Back in the 1970s, I was involved with this after the fact. I wasn't there when this happened, but I had some knowledge of it. A man was found, a torso of a man. I did a writing about this not too long ago somewhere. A torso was found that had been dumped on a county road just about a half a mile outside of that village. And the gentleman on his way to work that morning saw this body along the road. Head, arms, and legs were missing. It was just a torso. There were some other things going on with the body that I kind of heard about over the years. But anyway, they took the body and tried to do a identification. But, with no head, you can't do any dental because there's no teeth to do any dental on, and there was no fingerprints, naturally. They took the body and had it looked at and photographed and examined by a pathologist, and then it was buried in a little cemetery in Andover along the fence line in an unmarked grave. And I know where that grave is. I had been by it a few times over the years, and there was talk a few years ago of actually, because it's still an open case, it's a homicide naturally, and there was talk a few years ago of trying to exhume the body and see if they could possibly do any DNA. years ago, back in the 70s, that was before DNA was even practiced, thought about identification of remains. And in the last 5 years, I haven't heard any more about it. So I don't think anything's going to happen at this point. It's a case of no one stepping up, no family, because nobody knew who it was. The county of Allegheny, where the body was found, would have paid county funds to bury the body. So at this point, it would be an expensive situation to exhume the body, have it re-autopsied, and try to do a DNA. You're talking about several thousands of dollars, and I don't see that ever happening at this point. So I think it will remain. I think it will remain an unidentified homicide case, and will stay that forever, unless someone comes forward someday who might be in prison saying, "Well, I killed that guy that they found down there." If someone should ever do a deathbed confession about that body, then there might possibly be an ID, but I don't think it'll ever happen. It was a fascinating case.
Well, there are a lot of remains and a lot of cold cases and such where people are reopening them and solving them now because we do have the DNA and the technology to be able to solve these cases and bring justice to not only the people that were victims, but their families who are also victims, sometimes not even realizing they're victims until they come to them and say, hey, your family member didn't just leave and ditch you. Like, this happened to this person this long ago, and we found the body but never knew who it was. And now, with DNA, we can tell you that this was your daughter or sister or whatever. I've seen a lot of cases like that on TV. I'm very interested in cold case files and stuff like that. So if they did that for him, that would be really awesome, being that he is a big case for a lot of people. And perhaps if somebody started a petition, do you think that would have any pull?
It's hard to say. The Criminal Bureau of State Police down there have looked at the case for years. As far as leads, they probably have next to none. So many people are reported missing in larger cities. They assume this guy may have come from out of the city somewhere down New York way or Buffalo way and had the body dumped in Andover, New York. But unless you have a witness or you have some cooperation, it's hard to proceed because if it was someone local, if there were local people missing, naturally you'd try to go to those families first and saying, could this possibly be so-and-so that's been missing, But, Allegheny County is a very rural area, and there's a good chance he was not an Allegheny County resident. He was probably from downstate or upstate in the Buffalo region.
And like you were saying, the only thing that was found really was a torso, and there was really no other evidence found, correct?
Yeah. There was no evidence at the scene at all, no weapons found, nothing along that line. So it's just, here you've got a torso laying along the road, and it's pretty hard to go from that. Now you'd have a better chance now with DNA, because they could do a DNA profile to try to match about current DNA prison systems, et cetera, that's out there,
Yeah,
those cases that's cases 50 years old now. So it's getting way past time to solve. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, and being that they put all that time into it and spent all that money anyways, what's another couple $1,000s,
Yep.
But I'm sitting here racking my brain. There was a killer that was actually just recently arrested. It was the Golden State Killer, and it was due to somebody doing one of these random DNA tests that everybody's paying for to just basically figure out their genealogy, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, this person's related to the Golden State Killer, and they were able to track this person down after so long. Like, this guy was back in the 70s and such. So that was awesome that they were finally able to put that to rest, because there were several victims, both living in the beginning and then dead in the end. And so many people are interested in their own genealogy. Putting that out there can find not only the victim but the perpetrators. So that's pretty cool. And we're still advancing.
yeah, the science has progressed so much in the last 3 or 4 decades, and it keeps getting better because it's going to keep solving more of these disappearance cases. It's just going to help a lot of families. 'Cause a lot of families just have never had any closure. You know, it'd be nice to be able to get these people back to where they belong if they could find out who they were.
Mm-hmm. Nikki was saying health factor, spreading the ashes / cremains, put dust up the nose, or unexpectedly inhaled because the ashes are light and float in the air a bit. No health hazards from that? Wow. Well, not really, because everything's burnt off. It's just like you go to Viacita Lake here, the dirt is so light and airy, it goes up in the air, and basically you're blowing black dirt out of your nose for days, but you don't really get sick from it, even though there's more stuff in there than would be in the burnt ashes. Let's see. So we talked about your Tales Unleashed. What can you tell our listeners about your Undertakings of an Undertaker book?
Yeah, the Undertakings book is actually, as the subtitle says, true stories of being laid to rest. It's actually my memoir book. I think there are 28 chapters in there about things that I experienced when I was in funeral service, from growing up and being interested in it, to going to school and buying the funeral home, and different experiences I had. There's cases of homicide and suicide in there, and accidental death, and it's not a gruesome book. There's some lighter stories in there as well, a few light stories in there, and it's a good mix, because when I was looking for a publisher, and I found a publisher, he didn't want to publish a book that was totally gruesome and had stories that were just totally down, but a lot of people like that. But so he wanted some lighter stories, so there's some lighter stories in the book as well, about a beagle running through church during a funeral service, which is a pretty good story. There's some lighter stories in there.
I'm like, now I gotta read it. See what you've done.
The woman that wanted her husband buried with no pants, and there's some lighter stories in the book, but it's a good mix. And there's a story about the 9/11 deployment is a pretty good story, and Katrina recovery is a good one. There's a story in there about Arthur Shawcross, who was Rochester's serial killer. It was Genesee River Killer, he was called, in Rochester, New York. I had a situation one day where I was at the medical examiner's office in Rochester, New York, and actually talked to detectives and saw one set of remains that had been found that day that turned out to be one of Arthur Shawcross' victims. He had killed 11 women in the Rochester area. That's a pretty interesting story. It's a memoir book that gives people a little idea of what goes on in the funeral business and the things that we do, on a daily basis. So I think most people find it pretty interesting.
And like you said, there is a lot of funny and good that go along with the sad and the bad. One for me was when I was taking my dad on the bus to Arkansas. I've ridden on the bus several times in my life, and this was the most quiet bus ride I'd ever had. It was just me and my dad in his urn, and this lady and her child, and it was so quiet on the bus. It gave you a lot of time to think and kind of ponder over things, and she kept saying things to her daughter that my dad would say to me, like, is you is, or is you ain't my baby, and different stuff like that. On the way back, it was just packed and crazy, and there was a group of guys that were surrounding me and trying to protect me from whatever. Like, I didn't even realize a threat, but they were really protective over me, and it's kind of like your lost loved one coming through to send you different messages through people, through things that they're saying and feelings they're portraying, and even coming to your protection. It's pretty amazing how the other side can come through. Have you heard any stories about people having dreams about their deceased loved ones, bringing them messages?
Yeah. Other than when I talked earlier about the woman that said she had experienced the smoke from her husband's pipe for about 7 or 8 months after he had passed away. I have had other people tell me that they have had similar experiences, maybe not in the physical realm, well, where they could actually see that person that had passed away, but circumstances around the house told them that they had been there again, either where things had been put back in place, where maybe they had kept a certain glass or coffee mug or placed a certain book in a certain order on the bookshelf, things along that line. I've had several people tell me that they knew that the person who had passed away had indeed been back, and visited them, just to check up on them, as it were. And it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've heard different people talk about, and I had the same experience, but they talk about their deceased loved one coming to them in dreams and giving them a message. And I think it's because in the dream state, it's a certain realm where they can come through and easily manifest. In this physical realm, it's hard to manifest. It takes a lot of energy and practice. In the dream realm, it's kind of like a combined world. There. Yeah, and it's easier for them to come through and not only show themselves, but be able to speak to you. So I think it's a way for them to come through and easily give you a message. And so I tell people a lot of times, or ask them, have you had any dreams? Oh, yeah. Well, did you get any message from that? Well, I wasn't really paying attention. Well, if you have another one of these dreams, make sure you pay attention, because that's generally when they come through and try to share a message with you, because it's easier for them to manifest to you and not have to draw all that energy and focus to be able to do so.
Did you ever do anything during the day, going through your daily process, that you would do something and then you would say to yourself automatically, gee, that's something that my mom would have done?
Yeah,
or my dad would have done.
Yeah, or I'll be doing something and these thoughts will pop into my head that aren't mine, something that my dad would say, and automatically, like, that wasn't me, that was my dad. Or just talk to them and they answer back. You just have to listen closely, and I've had a lot of practice since the age of 5. But it is there. You just have to listen to that quiet voice there. And it's kind of confusing because a lot of times it does come through as your voice and not theirs, but it's them because of the characteristic and the things that they're saying.
Yeah. And that's kind of reassuring to know that, that was her, that was him, and that's kind of cool. That means they're still there around, still kind of looking after me, It's kind of nice.
Yeah, and it's something that you can't just do on command. Like, my mom has been deceased since I was 5, almost 6. I'm now 40, almost 41. I've only seen my mom twice. Once was shortly after she passed away. Another was when I was around 16, 17 years old. Otherwise, I haven't seen my mom. Like, you can't just will it to happen. It happens when it's meant to. So that's another thing that makes me think this isn't just a dream. This is actually her coming through. And well, the first dream she talked to me. Second dream she just smiled, and all I could do was cry.
Yeah.
But Bushi in the chat room was saying anything about burying the deceased with odd animals or chickens. You were talking about odd things buried. Is that allowed? To bury like a stuffed animal, as far as like a real animal stuffed, or like a dead animal with a person?
It depends on the state where you live. And again, I always tell people, depending on where you live, if you want to bury a pet cremains with you, and I have had that happen quite a few times, where people have lost a pet, they've had the pet cremated, had them put in a little urn, very small urn with a pet, maybe half the size of your fist, and they would keep that, and they would say, when I pass away, I want those cremains buried with me. And we would do that with no exception. And the only problem, and I always tell people, is some cemeteries are very strict about not wanting at cremains commingled, what they call commingled with human remains. And they don't want a dog or a cat buried with human remains. They say, no, that's for a pet cemetery. So I always tell people, ask ahead of time. If you know where you're going to be buried, the town, the city, wherever, ask ahead of time if there's a problem with that cemetery. And then at the same time, ask the funeral director that's going to be doing your work, is there going to be a problem burying Fido's ashes with Mom when she passes away? And again, that would be maybe different in New York State than it is in Colorado or Pennsylvania or New Jersey, because every state has different laws in place about burials. So you really have to check ahead of time about if there's things for or against those things. In most instances, there's not a problem. But I always tell people to try to check ahead of time to see if there's anything that would not allow them to do that.
And it's funny because a lot of times, like with the cemetery my mother was buried in, and then my uncle who raised us after my mom passed and my dad went on his own path, we buried him in the Huntsville, Arkansas cemetery, and it was considered a historical cemetery. And being that his parents were buried there, they allowed us to bury him on top of the parents because he was cremated as well. My dad, even though he had... Oh, did I lose you? I think I did. Let me go back over here real quick, guys, and call him back.
Hey, sorry I missed your call. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.
All right, let's try him back again. Hold on, guys. Sorry about this. Goodness gracious, sakes alive.
Oh, I'm back. Thank you.
Okay, good. I was like, oh no. I heard a bloop
Just
and I was like...
dropped right up. Just dropped out. We just entered maybe part of the Twilight Zone tonight.
Yes. This would only
Just
happen in
dropped
the
right
Twilight Zone.
Could only happen tonight.
Right. But yeah, being they were historical places, even though my dad had paid for his plot many, many years ago, we buried him there, which we could have done it for free, but he had already paid for it. With my uncle, we buried him for free because his parents were buried there. That's where he wanted to be buried. And they were like, yeah, sure. And we did a whole military ceremony and everything. It was pretty cool. But there are different rules, and all you got to do is check in and see what they are and to get around certain things.
Yeah, this is what the biggest thing I do when I go out to speak to different groups, service groups, clubs, libraries, whatever. I always tell people, if you don't have a funeral director in your family, try to find one ahead of time to ask questions and get to know someone. I mean, everybody has a family doctor, and if you have a pet, you have a vet, you have a dentist, and an insurance agent. Everybody needs a funeral director. You might not need them for 20 years, but it's nice to know one ahead of time, someone that you feel comfortable with, someone that you can call and ask questions with, either in person or go to the door. Always easier to find out ahead of time. And the other big thing I always tell people, I'm a big advocate for funeral business and talent, and having people tell someone ahead of time what you want for yourself. Every time I ever made arrangements for the family, first questions I had when I sat down with the family at a conference table, I would say, did your mom say what she wanted for herself? Did she ever tell you what she wanted for herself? And sometimes some people would say yes. Lots of times people would say no. Some people would have no idea. But it's so much easier ahead of time for not only the funeral director, but for the rest of the family, if you put your wishes down on paper and make them known to people so that they know exactly what's going to happen if something happens to you.
Yeah, it's very important because I thought my dad would love going into space, but that was the furthest place that he did not want to be. He wanted to be buried with my mom, and I was like, man, he loves Star Trek and all these other things. I think he'd like that, but he was not keen to the idea. He's like, no, just just bury me with your mom. I'm like, oh, okay. That's much easier. Bougie in the chat room was wondering if you could tell the UFO story. And then he was also wondering, what are your thoughts about the AATIP program and controlled disclosure? Do you know anything about that?
First of all, in the UFO story, is he talking about Tales Unleashed? That's a fictional story. It's not a real tale.
Yeah, it's just a cool little short story from his Tales Unleashed, yeah.
It's a cool little short story about a guy and a gal that were driving down a highway, a rural road, and had a UFO parallel them on the road for some time, and the heat was intense as they drove along with the UFO, and well, long story short, on that story, after they got home, the next day his father was looking at his car and found the side of the car had severe burn marks on the side of the paint of the car, which pretty much proved that something actually happened to them that night, which was in step with what they had reported about the UFO following them alongside the road late at night out in nowhere and giving off intense heat and light, and they had proof with the car paint bubbling off the side door. So, and then the other thing was about what again, Hudson?
He was also asking about your thoughts about the AATIP program and controlled disclosure. I'm not sure if...
Yeah, okay. I'm not familiar with that particular derivation he gave you, but there's a national funeral trade law which now says you have to be able to give customers ahead of time, a list of your services upon asking. You can ask a funeral home for the list of services, and they must provide a funeral trade rule. They must provide that to you. Gives you their list of what it costs. Not their merchandise, this is their services. Removal from the place of death, arrangements conference, what's the use of the funeral home cost per hour, per day, etc., embalming, restoration, all those things. So those are required now. Funeral homes must be able to give that information to consumers ahead of time if they request it. They do it at the time of arrangements as well, but a lot of people now actually go and compare cost, funeral home to funeral home. Years ago they wouldn't do that, but people do compare costs now, especially with cremation. If one guy on Maple Avenue will do cremation at $13.95, and the guy down the street wants $22.95, well, it might be a price matter of where those people are going to go. You know, so people do price shop for funerals now. They didn't do that 30 years ago, but people do price shop today for funerals.
I'm looking for a bargain. Darapolia was wondering, if you have an old parent that dies at home, who do you call first? Can you call the funeral parlor to pick her up if you know her wishes for her remains? You can call them and they'll call the coroner, or is it better to call 911?
He say what passed away? Did he say
an old parent, basically a elderly parent that dies at home?
A cat. As in pet? As a cat?
No, parent.
Cat? Oh, parent. I thought you said cat.
No, sorry.
Okay, normally what happens is if you find a person who is deceased at your house, in most states now, first thing you always want to do is, first thing I do is, if you're not sure if the person's dead or not, is call 911. Call an ambulance first. If you know the person is deceased, then you want to call the police. Call 911. To dispatch a police officer to your residence. They will call a coroner. Coroner in most states has to come to the residence to pronounce the person dead. Sometimes over the years, I've had the family's physician would be nearby, or we call the family physician, and they would say, well, we knew she was going to pass away today or in the next few days, So there's no need to call a coroner if the family physician was within the earshot, because you have to have someone sign that death certificate. So it's what they call an unattended death. And any unattended death is going to have a coroner present in order to call a funeral home to remove the body. They won't move it. If the person's actually dead, they won't remove it until the coroner pronounces the person dead.
Very true. Yeah, you always have to have the coroner there, unless, like you said, the doctor is right there. But generally, they'll call them in anyways. But when you're at a hospital, the doctor's present. They could sign off and say the person died at this time, but it's best to have the coroner come in. That's their job, to give the time and date of death and make it legitimate.
Yes.
Okay, so we have this question that comes from a listener of ours, and he likes to ask our guests, how many gnomes fit in your pocket? And in this case, he said, or in a full-size casket. It's kind of like a light-hearted question.
How give it to me again. How your pocket?
How many gnomes fit in your pocket or in a full-size casket?
I don't know. Oh, you said gnomes?
Yeah, gnomes.
As in those little statue type guys.
Yeah. But they could be like, living gnomes. I'm not sure. He didn't specify.
That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know how many gnomes would go in a casket. As many as you could put in there, I guess.
Right. As many as would fit.
Yes.
And Robert followed with, what size are the gnomes? He said, all gnomes are gnome size, which, that really doesn't answer the question.
Okay, that's a good one, though.
Coco was wondering if we're taking calls, which, Coco, you're more than welcome to call in with your question or comment, and the number for that is 970-335-9596. That's 970-335-9596, and we have T-minus 5.5 minutes and counting. Still scrolling through the questions. Yes, taking calls. Let's see. And when I get with a guest, a lot of times I'll get behind in chat, and so I'm just now seeing this. Daryl is asking if I can ask you, what is the least hassle way if you have... Okay, and we already answered that. She just asked it again in a more lengthy version. Asking about an elderly parent that passes in their sleep, who to call first.
Yep.
And we answered that. All right. So where's the best way for our listeners to find your books?
Okay, best ways are you go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. If you just type my name into the search, Stanley Swan, S-W-A-N, Stanley Swan, it'll bring up both books at both Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And both of those companies have what they have open and read feature. You can click on the book and actually read through the introduction, the chapters in both books, and read the first, I think, 2 stories in both books. Just by simply opening them up. It's this great feature that they have now at Amazon and Barnes both. And as I say, they can also drop me in line at my email. I'd love to hear from people. I'd like to hear from people. So drop me a note anytime, Undertakings, plural, at inbox.com.
And I'm a bit weirded out right now. Daryl's now saying her mom lives with her and she went and checked on her and she's not sure if she's alive right now or not. I would call the paramedics and have them come check on her.
Always, yeah. If you're not sure of a person, if they're deceased or not, you need first thing is you need to get the ambulance there. And if the person is deceased, then they will call police, which is pretty much required in most states now to have law enforcement there just to check on things, and then they will call the coroner, come in and pronounce. Yep.
Yeah. That's pretty...
Ambulance is always first if you're not sure. Always first.
Yeah, it's pretty scary, and a lot of people are in here asking her questions about the whole predicament, and she's saying that her mother's been sleeping basically like 23 hours a day, except for when she wakes her up to eat and drink and, clean her up or whatnot. Otherwise, she's just sleeping, but right now she's having issues trying to figure out if she is alive or not, and they're saying you need to call, and she's saying she's not quite ready yet, but that's not what's most important right now. What's most important is getting her the help she needs. If she's not passed away, perhaps if you call the paramedics, they can come and help her to live a bit longer, Don't just let it be unattended and be a question in your mind. Let some sort of activity happen to have somebody come in and check on your mom for sure.
Yep. You've had some great questions tonight, Tess. I've enjoyed it a great deal.
Me too. Our listeners are amazing people, and they always come up with so many awesome questions, and a lot of times it's things I would have never thought of. And it's so great to have a variety of people here to ask questions, because it's just different frames of mind and different ways of thinking. So it's pretty interesting.
And I enjoy it.
Me
and
too.
For those that didn't hear it live, you can hear it on the podcast for days later, correct?
Yes. You can listen to all of our archives at youtube.com under Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott. You can go to periscope.com and listen to them there. You can go through the website, spacedoutradio.com, and scroll down, and then it'll take you to a list of shows, both present if you're there for 10 p.m. Mountain Time and on, or if you missed last night's show, it'll show last night's show as well as whatever show you want to listen to since 2012, I believe. You can go over there to YouTube or Space Out Radio or Periscope, Spreaker.com, and listen to those shows.
As a talk show host, you'd enjoy this very quickly. Merv Griffin, you remember him? He was a TV talk show
Yes.
host. On his gravestone, he put, "I will not be back after the next commercial break."
All right. That's a good line.
Yeah, I thought that was cute. Yeah.
And I'm just scrolling through here really quick, trying to see, hoping I didn't miss any questions, because I tried to get to everybody's questions, and we still have, we're at the end of our time right now. So again, Stanley, I just want to thank you again for being my guest tonight. I'm honored and so glad that you were here, and I've really learned a lot from you and your years in undertaking. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Tessa. You have a safe week out there, and take care of yourself.
And once again, just in case our listeners missed it, can you tell them where to find your books and how to find your blog, so on and so forth?
Yeah, the book's available either at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Just Google either one, and Stanley Swan, S-W-A-N. Blog is My Undertakings, plural, My Undertakings, .blogspot, BLOGSPOT.com, blogspot.com. Email is undertakings, plural, at inbox.com.
I just want to thank you once more for being my guest. It was an honor and a pleasure for me, and I hope you have a wonderful evening and that you sleep well tonight, because I know you stayed up very late with us this evening, and we're so very thankful for you doing that.
Thanks, Tessa. You have a good night.
Thanks, Stanley. You as well. And I want to thank all my listeners out there on Facebook, Spreaker, Paranormal Radio, TalkStream Live, SpacedOutRadio.com, and wherever else in the universe you're listening tonight. It was my pleasure, literally and figuratively, and I can't wait to do it again tomorrow night. Tomorrow we have Mr. Bill Hauser, Can Dewey, and he's going to come on and talk to us about some of his new ghost boxes that he's gotten in.
Dressed as emperors, offering you 7 wonders, promising the deepest thunder.
So nighty-night, love and light to all my space cases out there. Make sure you guys don't work too hard this week. Make sure you take care of my yous. And always remember, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we own the night. You guys take care of my yous. And I hope to see you back here tomorrow night on spacedoutradio.com. And just a note to our regular SOR after party peeps, SOR Asylum will not be having an after party this evening as I am out of town in Colorado Springs and I am at a friend's house that so graciously lent me their computers, so I won't be able to be doing the SOR after party this evening, but please come back tomorrow night. You guys, take care of my news. Nighty night, love and light.